In 1943, Berlin's war rooms pulsed with tension. German intelligence officers, cloistered in dimly lit offices, combed through captured Soviet documents. These papers, worn and mud-stained, unveiled a torrent of American supplies 17 million tons to the Soviet Union by 1945. The Lend-Lease Act, enacted in March 1941, channeled 427,000 trucks, 13,000 combat vehicles, and 11,400 aircraft across vast oceans. German planners, once skeptical, now grappled with stark figures: 4,478,000 tons of foodstuffs, 2,670,000 tons of petroleum products, each number struck with unrelenting force. The United States, neutral until December 1941, was no peripheral player. Its industrial might, measured in millions of tons, reshaped fronts Germany had once overrun. Officers scrutinized ledgers, their tallies revealing a bitter reality. Eastern Front, where German divisions clashed with Soviet forces, rolled on American wheels. In the skies, British pilots flew American P-51 Mustangs, their range 1,600 miles with drop tanks. This was not bluster, it was logistics, precise and unyielding. The High Command had wagered on rapid triumphs. Blitzkrieg had shattered Poland, France, and the Low Countries. By 1942, Germany's reach spanned from the Atlantic to the Volga. Yet, the ledgers painted a bleaker picture. American aid bolstered Allied endurance, granting time Germany could not spare. Planners noted the Soviet Union's tenacity, its armies re-equipped with American steel. The United Kingdom, resilient despite relentless bombing, drew on Lend-Lease for critical munitions and raw materials. These resources sustained defiance, straining German supply lines. In Berlin, the atmosphere grew taut. Officers retraced logistics maps, red lines snaking toward American ports. The constraint was time Germany's industry could not stem this flood. The Eastern Front sprawled across frozen steppes, a relentless grind of steel and blood. In 1943, German divisions, dug in near Kursk, faced a Soviet army transformed. 427,000 American trucks churned through snow, hauling shells and soldiers. German outposts, scanning horizons, reported endless convoys, their details wired to Berlin. Captured ledgers, cross-checked with these sightings, confirmed the scale. 17 million tons of Lend-Lease aid sustained the Soviet war machine. The Battle of Kursk, raging in July 1943, exposed Germany's limits. Soviet forces fielded Lend-Lease aircraft, like P-39 Airacobras, alongside their own models, contesting the skies. Luftwaffe pilots, facing growing shortages, flew reduced sorties. The number that matters is 427,000 trucks, American vehicles, driving Soviet momentum. Berlin's planners recalibrated their strategies. The Soviet Union, nearly broken in 1941, endured through American aid. 4,478,000 tons of foodstuffs fed its armies. 2,670,000 tons of petroleum powered its tanks. German analysts, studying intercepted manifests, traced these supplies to Arctic ports and Persian corridors. Allied convoys, shielded by naval escorts, delivered with ruthless efficiency. The Arctic route lost about 7% of shipments. The Wehrmacht, spanning 1,000 miles of front, faced an impossible math. German factories built 11,600 armored vehicles in 1943. Allied forces, fueled by American output, deployed twice as many. Soviet 34 tanks, supported by 13,000 American combat vehicles, outflanked German armor. Fuel scarcity halted German advances. Field commanders felt the shift in 1943. Reports from Army Group Center described Soviet units moving with precision, their supply chains unbroken. American jeeps coordinated swift assaults. A German officer, decoding Soviet transmissions, cursed the American trucks sustaining enemy lines. This adversary perspective, raw and pointed, reached Berlin's war rooms. The Blitzkrieg's speed faded against a war of attrition. The United Kingdom, bolstered by Lend-Lease, escalated its air war. American P-51 Mustangs, with range 1,600 miles, guarded bombers over Germany. Luftwaffe squadrons, outnumbered in key engagements, bled strength. Allied formations darkened German skies. Germany's industries buckled under pressure. In 1943, the Ruhr Valley, core of German steel, endured relentless Allied bombing. American-supplied aircraft, cruising at 25,000 feet, dropped 700,000 tons of bombs by 1945. German planners, reviewing production logs, faced a stark divide. The United States built 2 million trucks. Germany produced 347,000. This gap, clear in ledgers, played out on the battlefield. Soviet offensives, like Belgorod-Kharkov in August 1943, exploited German exhaustion. American locomotives, 1,800 by 1944, pulled Soviet artillery forward. German units, retreating under fire, abandoned tanks for lack of fuel. The Eastern Front, once Germany's proving ground, became its graveyard. In Berlin, the High Command confronted a crumbling narrative. The dream of swift conquest, forged in early victories, dissolved. Planners, hunched over maps, saw Soviet armies, backed by 17 million tons of aid, preparing for 1944. Intelligence reports noted 64% of Soviet trucks were American-made by war's end, a figure that chilled staff briefings. The United States, an ocean away, set the war's rhythm. British industries, supported by Lend-Lease materials, produced munitions at scale. German U-boats sank only 1% of Lend-Lease shipments to the United Kingdom by 1943. The tide, driven by American factories, surged relentlessly. Human stories emerged from the chaos. Soviet drivers endured sub-zero nights, relying on American trucks to keep moving. German troops, entrenched near Orel, braced against Soviet barrages, their shells towed by American vehicles. Luftwaffe mechanics rationed fuel, servicing fighters after limited hours of flight. In Britain, air crews flew American bombers, striking German factories with precision. These moments, rooted in logistics, revealed a war tilting decisively. German planners, buried in reports, acknowledged the truth. American aid, measured in millions of tons, prolonged Allied campaigns. The Eastern Front, draining Germany's strength, signaled an inevitable reckoning. Berlin's war rooms, once bold with ambition, grew silent with foreboding. By late 1943, Germany's war machine groaned under mounting strain. The Eastern Front, a sprawling wound across frozen plains, bled resources daily. German planners, sequestered in Berlin, pored over updated ledgers, their calculations grim. 17 million tons of American Lend-Lease aid had reached the Soviet Union by 1945, sustaining its relentless offensives. 427,000 trucks, their wheels grinding through mud, powered Soviet mobility. These vehicles, paired with 2,670,000 tons of petroleum, kept Red Army tanks rolling. German intelligence, sifting intercepted reports, tracked this flood. 11,400 aircraft, 13,000 combat vehicles, 4,478,000 tons of foodstuffs. The United States, an industrial colossus, dictated the war's tempo. British air raids, flown with American P-51 Mustangs, ranging 1,600 miles, battered German factories. The ledgers, once dismissed, now loomed as harbingers of defeat. The High Command, once buoyed by Blitzkrieg's triumphs, faced a stark reckoning. Early victories in Poland and France had fed a myth of invincibility, yet 1943's failures, Kursk, Belgorod, Kharkov, exposed the truth. Soviet forces, bolstered by American logistics, outmaneuvered German divisions. 64% of Soviet trucks, American-made by war's end, underpinned operations. German analysts, cross-referencing battlefield losses, estimated Lend-Lease extended Soviet campaigns by 12 months. The Wehrmacht, spanning 1,000 miles, could not match this output. German factories produced 347,000 trucks. The United States delivered 2 million. This chasm, evident in production logs, translated to collapsing fronts. Luftwaffe squadrons, fuel rationed to 300 gallons per mission, faltered against Allied air superiority. The constraint was steel. Germany forged 11,600 armored vehicles in 1943, half the Allied total. In field headquarters, German officers sensed the shift. Army Group South, battered near Kharkov, reported Soviet artillery, towed by American locomotives, pounding their lines. 1,800 of these trains, delivered by 1944, sustained Soviet momentum. A German colonel, scanning Soviet positions, cursed the American trucks, fueling enemy assaults. This adversary perspective, sharp and bitter, echoed through Berlin's corridors. The Blitzkrieg's lightning strikes had slowed to a slog. On the Western Front, British forces, equipped with Lend-Lease munitions, prepared for invasion. American-supplied bombers, flying at 25,000 feet, dropped 700,000 tons of ordnance by 1945. German cities smoldered. The Ruhr Valley, heart of steel production, lay crippled. The Luftwaffe, outnumbered in key battles, lost the skies. Berlin's war rooms grew claustrophobic with dread. Planners, hunched over maps, traced Soviet advances, each arrow backed by American aid. The myth of a quick victory, nurtured through 1941, crumbled. Late 1943 marked the inflection. Germany shifted to defensive lines, abandoning offensive dreams. Intelligence reports, stark and unrelenting, detailed Soviet preparations for 1944. Operation Bagration, looming on the horizon, would exploit 64% American-made trucks. German U-boats, once wolves of the Atlantic, sank only 1% of Lend-Lease shipments to the United Kingdom by 1943. Arctic convoys, losing 7% of cargo, still delivered millions of tons. The United States, an ocean away, orchestrated this deluge, its factories unscarred by war. British industries, fed by Lend-Lease raw materials, churned out shells and aircraft, compounding Germany's plight. Human voices pierced the data's cold weight. Soviet tank crews, refueling with American petroleum, pressed attacks through blizzards. German soldiers, dug in near Smolensk, watched Soviet convoys, led by American jeeps, bypass their flanks. Luftwaffe pilots, grounded by fuel shortages, serviced planes after 10 hours of flight. In Britain, air crews flew American B-17 flying fortresses, their bombs leveling German infrastructure. These fragments, woven through logistics, painted a war slipping from Germany's grasp. Planners, their desks buried in reports, admitted the unpalatable truth. American aid, measured in 17 million tons, did not just sustain the Allies, it tilted the battlefield decisively. The Eastern Front, now a Soviet juggernaut, foreshadowed collapse. The Western Front, poised for invasion, tightened the noose. Germany's industries, battered by Allied raids, teetered on collapse. In 1943, the Ruhr's steel output plummeted under relentless bombing. German planners, analyzing production, noted a fatal gap. 2 million American trucks against 347,000 German ones. This disparity fueled Soviet offensives, like the Dnieper crossings in late 1943, where American locomotives hauled artillery forward. German divisions, low on fuel, abandoned equipment in retreat. The Luftwaffe, its aircraft dwindling, faced Allied formations 3 times their size in key sectors. Berlin's streets, littered with rubble, mirrored the war's trajectory. Planners, once plotting conquest, now drafted defensive schemes, their maps a tangle of red arrows. The United States, through Lend-Lease, had weaponized time, granting the Allies endurance Germany could not match. The acknowledgement came in hushed tones. German reports, circulated in 1943, conceded Lend-Lease's impact. Soviet resilience, British air power, and the looming Western Front all bore American fingerprints. The High Command, staring at dwindling reserves, faced an unwinnable war. The Eastern Front, draining men and materiel, could not be held. The Western Allies, massing in Britain, prepared to strike. American factories, untouched by bombs, produced at a scale Germany could not counter. 17 million tons of aid, a figure etched in planners' minds, underpinned this reality. The war's rhythm, set by American industry, pulsed through every front. Berlin's war rooms, once alive with ambition, now echoed with the weight of inevitability. The ledgers, their numbers unassailable, had foretold this moment. In 1944, Germany's war machine staggered under relentless pressure. The Eastern Front, a jagged scar across Europe, consumed men and steel. German planners, cloistered in Berlin's bunkers, faced updated ledgers, their numbers merciless. 17 million tons of American Lend-Lease aid had reached the Soviet Union by 1945, fueling its unstoppable advance. 427,000 trucks, their engines roaring through mud, powered Soviet offensives. 2,670,000 tons of petroleum kept tanks moving. 4,478,000 tons of foodstuffs fed millions of soldiers. German intelligence, poring over captured manifests, tracked 11,400 aircraft and 13,000 combat vehicles. The United States, its factories untouched, dictated the war's pace. British bombers, escorted by American P-51 Mustangs with range 1,600 miles, pulverized German cities. The ledgers, once mocked, now screamed defeat. The High Command, its early triumphs a fading memory, grappled with collapse. Operation Bagration, launched in June 1944, shattered Army Group Center. Soviet forces, with 64% of trucks American-made, obliterated German lines. 1,800 American locomotives hauled artillery across Belarus, enabling breakthroughs. German analysts, studying Soviet logistics, estimated Lend-Lease doubled the Red Army's operational range. The Wehrmacht, retreating across 1,000 miles, bled dry. German factories, crippled by Allied raids, produced 347,000 trucks. The United States supplied 2 million. This gulf, stark in reports, fueled Soviet momentum. Luftwaffe pilots, rationed to 300 gallons per mission, faced Allied air fleets. The constraint was fuel. German tanks stalled after limited hours of combat. Field commanders, entrenched in crumbling defenses, felt the vice tighten. Reports from the Vistula River described Soviet 34 tanks, supported by American combat vehicles, outflanking German positions. A German general, scanning Soviet supply lines, cursed the American trucks driving enemy assaults. This adversary perspective, raw and desperate, reached Berlin's war rooms. The Blitzkrieg's ghost had vanished. Attrition ruled. In the West, the Allies landed in Normandy, June 1944. British and American forces, equipped with Lend-Lease munitions, surged inland. American-supplied bombers, flying at 25,000 feet, dropped 700,000 tons of ordnance by 1945. The Luftwaffe, its squadrons dwindling, could not contest the skies. German cities burned. The Ruhr Valley, steel's heart, lay in ruins. Berlin's bunkers buzzed with panic. Planners, their maps overrun with red arrows, tracked Soviet and Western advances. The myth of German invincibility, born in 1940, dissolved. 1944's defeats Bagration, Normandy confirmed the Ledger's prophecy. Soviet offensives, backed by 17 million tons of aid, crushed entire armies. Intelligence reports, grim and precise, noted American trucks enabled rapid Soviet maneuvers. The Western Front, now active, compounded the strain. Allied convoys, with only 1% of shipments to the United Kingdom lost by 1944, delivered relentlessly. Arctic routes, losing 7% of cargo, still fed the Soviet machine. The United States, its industries unscathed, orchestrated this onslaught. British factories, bolstered by Lend-Lease materials, produced aircraft and shells at scale. Human stories pierced the chaos. Soviet tankers, fueled by American petroleum, drove through German lines in Poland. German soldiers, retreating near Minsk, watched Soviet artillery, towed by American locomotives, shatter their defenses. Luftwaffe mechanics, scavenging parts, kept fighters aloft for mere hours. In Britain, air crews flew American B-24 Liberators, their bombs leveling German infrastructure. These vignettes, grounded in logistics, underscored a war lost to materiel. Planners, buried in dispatches, faced the truth. American aid, measured in millions of tons, had tipped the scales. The Eastern Front, a Soviet steamroller, devoured German reserves. The Western Front, with Allied armies advancing, tightened the noose. Berlin's streets, choked with rubble, mirrored the Reich's fate. Germany's industries, battered by raids, collapsed under Allied bombs. In 1944, the Ruhr's output plummeted. Steel production fell by half. German planners, analyzing logs, noted the disparity. 2 million American trucks against 347,000 German ones. This gap drove Soviet victories, like the Vistula-Oder offensive, where American-supplied trucks sped Soviet armies forward. German divisions, low on ammunition, abandoned equipment in retreat. The Luftwaffe, its aircraft outnumbered in critical sectors, lost control of the skies. Berlin's defenses, hastily erected, crumbled under Allied pressure. Planners, once dreaming of empire, now sketched fallback lines, their maps a maze of encirclements. The United States, through Lend-Lease, had weaponized endurance, outlasting Germany's strained resources. The acknowledgement spread through Berlin's ranks. Reports, circulated in 1944, admitted Lend-Lease's decisive role. Soviet mobility, British air power, and Western invasions bore American fingerprints. The High Command, its reserves exhausted, faced a multi-front collapse. The Eastern Front, propelled by 64% American-made trucks, pushed toward Germany's borders. The Western Allies, backed by Lend-Lease, closed in from France. American factories, untouched by war, produced at a scale Germany could not match. 17 million tons of aid, a figure burned into planners' minds, underpinned this reality. The war's tempo, set by American industry, pulsed through every theater. German U-boats, their threat diminished, could not disrupt the flow. Berlin's war rooms, once plotting conquest, now whispered of survival. The human toll grew stark. Soviet drivers, braving sub-zero nights, relied on American trucks to advance. German troops, trapped in Courland, faced Soviet barrages, their shells delivered by American vehicles. Luftwaffe pilots, grounded by shortages, watched Allied bombers darken the skies. In Britain, air crews flew American aircraft, their raids crippling German production. These moments, tied to logistics, revealed a war beyond salvation. Planners, their desks cluttered with dire reports, conceded the inevitable. American aid, measured in 17 million tons, had not just sustained the Allies, it had broken Germany's back. The fronts, east and west, converged on the Reich. Berlin, its skyline scarred, braced for the end. The ledgers, their numbers unyielding, had foretold this collapse. In early 1945, Germany's war machine lay in tatters. The eastern and western fronts, converging like steel jaws, crushed the Reich's remnants. Berlin's bunkers, shrouded in smoke, housed planners grappling with despair. Updated ledgers, their numbers relentless, confirmed the deluge. 17 million tons of American Lend-Lease aid had reached the Soviet Union by war's end. 427,000 trucks, grinding through snow and rubble, drove Soviet spearheads toward Berlin. 2,670,000 tons of petroleum-fueled relentless tank assaults, 4,478,000 tons of foodstuffs sustained millions of soldiers. German intelligence, sifting through final reports, catalogued 11,400 aircraft and 13,000 combat vehicles. The United States, its factories unscarred, dictated the war's final act. British and American bombers, escorted by P-51 Mustangs with range 1,600 miles, reduced German cities to ash. The ledgers, now undeniable, spelled doom. The High Command, its dreams of conquest shattered, faced annihilation. Operation Bagration and Normandy's fallout had gutted German armies. The Vistula-Oder offensive, launched in January 1945, saw Soviet forces, with 64% of trucks American-made, surge across Poland. 1,800 American locomotives hauled artillery, enabling rapid advances. German analysts, poring over Soviet logistics, noted Lend-Lease tripled the Red Army's mobility. The Wehrmacht, reduced to scattered pockets, could not respond. German factories, bombed into ruin, produced 347,000 trucks. The United States supplied 2 million. This disparity, etched in crumbling records, fueled Allied dominance. Luftwaffe pilots, rationed to 200 gallons per mission, faced overwhelming Allied air fleets. The constraint was ammunition. German guns fell silent after sparse volleys. Field commanders, cornered in shrinking enclaves, saw no reprieve. Reports from the Oder River described Soviet 34 tanks, backed by American combat vehicles, smashing German lines. A German major, scanning Soviet convoys, cursed the American trucks powering enemy thrusts. This adversary perspective, sharp and hopeless, echoed in Berlin's bunkers. The Blitzkrieg's memory was dust. Survival was all. In the West, Allied armies, equipped with Lend-Lease munitions, crossed the Rhine in March 1945. American-supplied bombers, flying at 25,000 feet, dropped 700,000 tons of ordnance by war's end. The Luftwaffe, its planes grounded, could not resist. German infrastructure, from bridges to rail yards, lay in ruins. The Ruhr Valley, once steel's heart, was a graveyard of twisted metal. Berlin's bunkers trembled under air raids. Planners, their maps a chaos of red arrows, tracked Soviet and Allied advances. The myth of German resilience, clung to through 1944, dissolved. The Vistula-Oder offensive, driven by 17 million tons of aid, brought Soviet armies to Germany's doorstep. Intelligence reports, stark and final, highlighted American trucks enabling Soviet speed. The Western Front, with Allied forces flooding Germany, closed the trap. Allied convoys, losing only 1% of shipments to the United Kingdom by 1945, delivered ceaselessly. Arctic routes, with 7% losses, still fed the Soviet juggernaut. The United States, its industries relentless, orchestrated this endgame. British factories, sustained by Lend-Lease materials, churned out shells and aircraft, burying Germany's hopes. Human stories cut through the devastation. Soviet tankers, fueled by American petroleum, rolled through German villages. German soldiers, trapped in Berlin's outskirts, faced Soviet barrages, their shells hauled by American locomotives. Luftwaffe mechanics, scavenging fuel, kept fighters aloft for mere minutes. In Britain, air crews flew American B-24 Liberators, their bombs erasing German defenses. These snapshots, rooted in logistics, framed a war lost to materiel. Planners, their desks buried in frantic dispatches, faced the truth. American aid, measured in 17 million tons, had shattered Germany's will. The Eastern Front, now at Berlin's gates, devoured the Wehrmacht. The Western Front, with Allied armies closing in, sealed the Reich's fate. Berlin's streets, choked with debris, mirrored a nation's collapse. Germany's industries, pulverized by raids, ceased to function. In 1945, the Ruhr steel mills, bombed beyond repair, produced nothing. German planners, reviewing final logs, noted the chasm: 2 million American trucks against 347,000 German ones. This gap drove Soviet victories, like the Berlin Offensive in April 1945, where American-supplied trucks sped Soviet armies forward. German units, out of fuel, abandoned tanks in shattered streets. The Luftwaffe, its aircraft decimated, faced Allied formations 10 times their size in final battles. Berlin's defenses, makeshift and desperate, collapsed under Soviet artillery. Planners, once plotting empire, now scratched evacuation plans, their maps erased by encirclements. The United States, through Lend-Lease, had weaponized inevitability, outlasting Germany's broken machine. The admission came in whispers. German reports, scrawled in 1945, conceded Lend-Lease's role. Soviet speed, Allied air power, and Western advances bore American stamps. The High Command, its bunkers shaking, faced total defeat. The Eastern Front, propelled by 64% American-made trucks, stormed Berlin. The Western Allies, backed by Lend-Lease, carved through Germany's west. American factories, untouched by war, produced at scales Germany could not dream. 17 million tons of aid, a figure haunting planners' minds, underpinned this end. The war's rhythm, set by American industry, pulsed through every shattered front. German U-boats, their menace gone, could not halt the tide. Berlin's bunkers, once plotting victory, now sheltered men awaiting surrender. The human toll was unrelenting. Soviet drivers, braving shellfire, relied on American trucks to reach Berlin. German troops, cornered in bunkers, faced Soviet barrages, their shells delivered by American vehicles. Luftwaffe pilots, out of fuel, watched Allied bombers blot the sky. In Britain, air crews flew American aircraft, their raids silencing German resistance. These moments, tied to logistics, revealed a war beyond recovery. Planners, their reports reduced to ash, acknowledged the final truth. American aid, measured in 17 million tons, had not just tipped the battlefield, it had buried Germany. The fronts, east and west, converged on Berlin's ruins. The city, its skyline erased, braced for the end. The ledgers, their numbers unassailable, had scripted this fall. In April 1945, Berlin stood as a shattered husk, its streets choked with rubble. The Eastern and Western fronts, relentless in their advance, had merged into a vice crushing the Reich. German planners, huddled in candlelit bunkers, faced ledgers now etched with finality. 17 million tons of American Lend-Lease aid had fueled the Soviet Union's march to Berlin. 427,000 trucks, their tires grinding through debris, carried Soviet troops to the city's gates. 2,670,000 tons of petroleum-powered tank assaults, 4,478,000 tons of foodstuffs fed the Red Army's millions. German intelligence, clutching tattered reports, tallied 11,400 aircraft and 13,000 combat vehicles. The United States, its factories untouched, had scripted the war's end. Allied daylight bomber streams, escorted by United States Army Air Force's P-51, Mustangs with range 1,600 miles, left German defenses in ruins. The ledgers, once scorned, now told Germany's defeat. The High Command, its authority crumbling, faced obliteration. The Vistula Oder and Berlin offensives had annihilated German armies. Soviet forces, with nearly a third of trucks American-made, stormed through Brandenburg. 1,800 American locomotives hauled artillery, pounding Berlin's outskirts. German analysts, their desks littered with final estimates, noted Lend-Lease greatly expanded Soviet operational mobility. The Wehrmacht, reduced to ragtag units, could not resist. German factories, bombed to dust, had produced 347,000 trucks. The United States supplied 2 million. This chasm, stark in fading records, drove Allied victory. Luftwaffe pilots, facing acute shortages, flew reduced sorties. The constraint was fuel German aircraft grounded after limited hours of flight. Field commanders, trapped in Berlin's ruins, saw no escape. Reports from the Spree River described Soviet 34 tanks, supported by Lend-Lease trucks and locomotives, breaching city defenses. A German captain, peering through smoke, cursed the American trucks, feeding Soviet assaults. This adversary perspective, raw and futile, echoed in collapsing bunkers. The Blitzkrieg's echo was gone. Only defeat remained. In the West, Allied armies, armed with Lend-Lease munitions, swept through Germany's heart. American-supplied bombers, flying at 25,000 feet, had dropped 700,000 tons of ordnance by 1945. The Luftwaffe, its planes scrapped, could not reply. German infrastructure roads, rails, bridges lay obliterated. Berlin, once the Reich's heart, was a smoldering grave. Berlin's bunkers shook under Soviet shells. Planners, their maps torn and useless, tracked the final encirclements. The myth of German endurance, clung to through 1944, was ash. The Berlin offensive, driven by 17 million tons of aid, brought Soviet armies to the Reichstag. Intelligence reports, scribbled in haste, confirmed American trucks powered Soviet speed. The Western Allies, closing from the Elbe, sealed Germany's fate. Allied convoys, with 1% of shipments to the United Kingdom lost by 1945, delivered without pause. Arctic routes, losing 7%, still fed the Soviet advance. The United States, its industries relentless, had engineered this collapse. British factories, sustained by Lend-Lease materials, produced shells that buried German resistance. Human stories pierced the inferno. Soviet tankers, fueled by American petroleum, drove through Berlin's streets. German soldiers, cornered in subway tunnels, faced Soviet barrages, their shells hauled by American locomotives. Luftwaffe pilots, out of aircraft, manned anti-aircraft guns against Allied bombers. In Britain, air crews flew American B-24 Liberators, their raids silencing German artillery. These fragments, bound to logistics, framed a war ended by materiel. Planners, their reports burned in bunker fires, faced the truth. American aid, measured in 17 million tons, had crushed Germany. The Eastern Front, now Berlin's streets, consumed the Wehrmacht. The Western Front, with Allied armies at the Elbe, closed the circle. Berlin's skyline, erased by smoke, marked the Reich's end. Germany's industries, obliterated by raids, had ceased to function. In 1945, the Ruhr's steel mills, bombed to a fraction of capacity, produced little. German planners, clutching final logs, noted the divide: 2 million American trucks against 347,000 German ones. This gap drove the Berlin Offensive, where American-supplied trucks sped Soviet armies to the Reichstag. German units, out of ammunition, surrendered in shattered buildings. The Luftwaffe, its squadrons gone, faced Allied air fleets 20 times their size in final skies. Berlin's defenses, cobbled from civilians and boys, collapsed under Soviet fire. Planners, once envisioning empire, now fled through sewers, their maps lost to flames. The United States, through Lend-Lease, had weaponized annihilation, outlasting Germany's broken shell. The confession came in silence. German reports, scrawled in bunkers, admitted Lend-Lease's decisive hand. Soviet power, Allied air dominance, and Western advances bore American marks. The High Command, its leaders scattered, faced unconditional surrender. The Eastern Front, propelled by nearly a third American-made trucks, captured Berlin. The Western Allies, backed by Lend-Lease, met Soviets at the Elbe. American factories, untouched by bombs, produced at scales Germany could not fathom. 17 million tons of aid, a figure searing planners' minds, had scripted this end. The war's pulse, set by American industry, throbbed through Berlin's ruins. German U-boats, their threat erased, could not stem the tide. Berlin's bunkers, once plotting glory, became tombs for a fallen Reich. The human cost was stark. Soviet drivers, under shell fire, relied on American trucks to seize Berlin. German troops, trapped in burning streets, faced Soviet barrages, their shells delivered by American vehicles. Luftwaffe gunners, out of fuel, fired at Allied bombers until silenced. In Britain, aircrews flew American aircraft, their bombs ending German resistance. These moments, tied to logistics, revealed a war lost to supply. Planners, their voices stilled. American aid, measured in 17 million tons, had not just tilted the battlefield, it had buried the Reich. The fronts, east and west, met in Berlin's ashes. The city, its heart stopped, fell on May 8, 1945. The ledgers, their numbers eternal, had written this epitaph. Berlin's fall, in May 1945, marked the Reich's end, its ruins a testament to American Lend-Lease. 17 million tons of aid, including 427,000 trucks, had driven Soviet armies to victory. 2,670,000 tons of petroleum and 4,478,000 tons of foodstuffs sustained the Allied surge. The United States, its factories unscathed, had reshaped the war. British and American air forces, with P-51 Mustangs ranging 1,600 miles, had crippled German industry. The ledgers, once doubted, proved prophetic. Post-war analyses, penned by German officers, credited Lend-Lease with accelerating defeat. Nearly a third of Soviet trucks, American-made, had enabled rapid offensives. 1,800 locomotives and 11,400 aircraft had bolstered Allied momentum. The Wehrmacht, limited to 347,000 trucks against America's 2 million, could not compete. Allied bombers, dropping 700,000 tons of ordnance, had left the Ruhr's steel mills in tatters. German U-boats, sinking 1% of United Kingdom-bound shipments, failed to halt the tide. Arctic routes, with 7% losses, still delivered. The human cost lingered. Soviet veterans recalled American trucks carrying them to Berlin. German survivors, amid rubble, mourned a war lost to logistics. British air crews, flying American bombers, remembered raids that broke the Reich. These stories, tied to 17 million tons of aid, framed the victory. The United States, through Lend-Lease, had not just tilted the battlefield, it had ensured Germany's collapse. The ledger's numbers, etched in history, closed the war's final chapter,